Hey guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going over some of my most recent reads. I put this off a little bit too long, so there's a bunch of books, so I'm splitting it into two different videos, so you'll get one now and one later on in the month. But I haven't been doing like monthly wrap-ups, even though they're essentially monthly wrap-ups. I'm not doing them like at the beginning of the month and whatever, which made me go a little longer. So this is like 2 months worth of books, which is why it's gonna end up being in 2 videos. But I read mostly really good books for the last couple of months, so let's get into it. First, we have Blood Ink Sister Scribe by Emma Terza. This is a standalone adult fantasy, like dark academia kind of fantasy, in which it's not taking place in a school, but it's really focused around books. So this book primarily focuses on two sisters. They're half-sisters, and their father passed tragically because of a magical book. So their family is kind of like keepers of these magical books that have like spells and things in them and can like do magic, and there are people who can like recognize these books, and there's people that can write these books and create these books. And so one of the daughters is someone who can like read and decipher and like discover some of these books, and the other daughter has like no kind of magical abilities related to that. But their father passes away, and then later some things start happening that kind of are like bringing them together around these books. And you also get the POV of somebody outside of their family who's involved in this sort of like these like secret society kind of culty organizations around these books, because these books can be so powerful that they can like just make you basically control the world. So this is a book very much around like family dynamics, sister stuff, and like all of that. But then with this other character, you also have like some things outside of this family, because they're just a family of kind of like small collectors. He is more attached to this like grander scope of all of the people and like machinations and everything happening kind of like behind the scenes and things. So he brings this other perspective into it, and you kind of see how like there are people after the like sisters because of their ties to these books. And yeah, it's bringing in like a lot of stuff, because it's not only talking about the girls and their lives and their very different lives and the different relationship they had with their dad and their moms, because the one mom is like a stepmom to the older daughter whose mother passed before the younger one was born, but then the younger one, that is her actual mother. And yeah, there's just like a lot of mystery and things attached, but there's lots of family dynamic stuff. And then the way that the magic system is made with like these books is so interesting. I really enjoy books with like magical systems related to books, shocker, in them. So I thought that was really well done. And then just like the plot and the pacing and things is fun and snappy. There's a lot of mystery to it, but it's not at the like expense of the characters and the character arcs and things. And I listened to this on audiobook, and I highly enjoyed it. So overall, I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, maybe more of like a 4.5, because there are pieces of it that have already faded a little bit for me, but the experience of it was like so good, and this is definitely one that I would go back to and definitely recommend for anybody that's really into like books about books or books with magic systems that involve books. Then I read a title that I cannot talk about because it's part of the St. Martin's Press boycott. The last time I mentioned the boycott on YouTube, I got some very uninformed, ignorant comments about how there's no point in mentioning a boycott. So in case you're one of those people, the point of a marketing boycott is so that everyone around, mostly the publisher, but also other readers, know why we're boycotting a company. That is the point. It's to spread awareness, and it's also to show the publishers like, look, we would be talking about your books if you would have actually resolved this thing in these very simple asks that we have of you around like not being Islamophobic and like actively doing harm to a lot of BIPOC reviewers and things. So it's really a simple ask, and that's why I include this. Some people said it's virtue signaling. The whole point is to talk about it. So that's not what virtue signaling is. It's like you have to talk about things to be a part of activism sometimes, you know, because then no one knows like what's going on if you don't talk about it. So just wanted to clear that up a little bit, because I know how some of you girls like to tussle. It's a book I really liked, one of my favorites of the year. I'd be talking about it, screaming about it from the rooftops, but I can't because marketing boycott. Then, very excitingly, from a series standpoint, I continued on with the Stormlight Archives and finally read Words of Radiance, which has been on my shelf forever. This is the second book in the Stormlight Archives. It's Brandon Sanderson's, one of his many epic, this is the most epic, longest series that he's going to have, though. And this is book 2 in that series. My physical copies are broken into 2, but I've been listening to these on audio, and I think I'll continue to do that. I really enjoyed this installment. I think it was a little bit better than the first book even, which I also gave 5 stars to, I'm pretty sure, but the first book was like slower and a lot of setup. This one is faster paced, and there's like much more world building things going on that aren't just set up, but that are just like nice, interesting reveals. So you learn a ton more about the world. You learn a lot about like the different character things and like different character machinations. You see things starting to be like fully set up and realized. And yeah, there's just like a lot of reveals with not only some of the more like sort of like villainy characters, but just like more things progress. And I really enjoy all of our POV characters. They're very fun. I love Shallan a lot. But yeah, so you get a lot of those things. And what's nice about this is there were parts about this book and even the first book that I was like, oh, we're getting these seeds now, and they're not going to be answered for like books and books and books. Actually, no. A lot of things get answered in this book, and a lot of things get resolved in this book. So it's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be even bigger than I realized, which like makes sense for like a 10-book series in which all the books are going to be 1,000 pages, but still wild to me. So yeah, what I really liked about this is this installment didn't leave me feeling like I was left hanging, like it's like, oh, what's going to, you know, happen next? I want to read the next one, and I plan to maybe before the end of the year read Oathbringer, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, like there's all these seeds being planted and I know nothing. It's like you get some very satisfying conclusions to some things. There was also a thing I might do a gush in addition to the review about this, actually. I'm conflicted. But I do plan on filming a full review for this, but I might do a gush because there's a thing, especially in the very end, that I thought might happen, but I thought we were going to have to hold out for that for like multiple books, if not just even the next book, and we didn't. And I'm so grateful for that. Not a cliffhanger. We love to see it. Anyway, 5 out of 5 stars for this one. Then I read The Second Rebel by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is the second book in the First Sister trilogy, and this takes place in a world in which there are, like, Mercury and Venus are sort of a society, and, like, Mars and Earth are a society, and Mars and Earth have almost like a Handmaid's Tale-esque sort of sci-fi religion thing going on, and then Mercury and Venus have this, like, they're the opposite of that, but they have like a lot of tech, and they do a lot of things with like these like brain implant things that kind of connect you to like other fighters and other people and things. And then there's also like the Belters and things that like are outside of that. So a setup that we are not unfamiliar with in sci-fi, but I really like what this does. This is like a nice little space opera series. So I can't go into a ton of details about the second book plot-wise, but this expands from just 2 POVs, or was there 3 technically? Technically 3 in the first book, but mostly 2 POVs to like 4 in this one. And there was parts of this that were really successful for me with those POVs, and some POVs that I didn't like as much and I thought we didn't necessarily need. And there was some like definite swings away from what I thought this book was going to cover. So there was parts that I didn't necessarily enjoy as much, and I hope that we kind of refocus and get back to some things in the final book. But there's a lot of stuff that I really did like. And yeah, there's just some things editing-wise that I think could have been fixed a little bit. Maybe that's because I'm really just in an editing brain lately. I've been doing freelance editing services, so if you're interested in having that for like a really deep discount because I'm just building up my portfolio right now, I will link all of the information in the description. But yeah, I just feel like one of the POVs could have definitely been cut out and still been fine, because some of the like character motivations and stuff I didn't really feel the whole POV necessarily. But overall, I still really enjoyed this. I still really enjoy where the series is going. If you like space opera-y sci-fi, then you'll probably really enjoy this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And looking forward to this conclusion. This is definitely a series that like has a lot of payoff for characters, but also makes characters suffer a lot. But in a fast way, so you're not sitting in it for too long. So I think this is a really great alternative for if you're kind of like no on the Red Rising books. This is much better and more female-led, which is great too. And finally, I will finish this wrap-up off with talking about the Between Earth and Sky series. So I reread the second book in the series, Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a book I read when it first came out, and this whole series is basically following, it's sort of taking place in a fantasy world that is heavily based on indigenous Central American culture, kind of Southern and Central like America, indigeneity, and like those religions and those cultures and things. And in the first book, there are a number of different characters that we're following. One who is like the sun priest, who is sort of like an initiate of the sun god, and what's going on with her in like one of the main cities. And then a woman who's essentially a siren, kind of mermaid, and she encounters a man who is being sent on a mission for like the crow god and is potentially like prophet, second coming kind of thing. And all of their paths kind of intersect in the first book. So that is very, very simplified. The first book is great. The second book is just obviously a continuation of that. The second book is a lot of setup for like the third book in a lot of ways, but in ways that were pretty satisfying and were still satisfying on reread. So you get to see a lot more of like the political machinations, the other parties outside of just like in the first book, you see a lot of like the crow god and the sun god, but like nothing else. The second book expands a lot on that, and they're like other sort of gods and other peoples brought in, and different people and different diverging paths kind of come in as well. But the second book is much shorter, so there is a little bit of like, I wouldn't quite call it second book syndrome, but the first book is pretty large and the last book is pretty large, which I'll get to in a second. But I still really liked this, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, still on reread. Then I read The Mirrored Heavens, which is the conclusion to this. So I still really enjoyed this. I listened to this whole series on audiobook, and I really enjoy the audiobook because it has different narrators for each POV. I believe the third book has 4 at least POVs that we're following, some that we followed before and some new ones. And again, really enjoyed all of those different like POVs and stuff. I think all the POVs in this are very needed and give like a different light to things. I think that this should have been a quartet. There were some pacing things with this final book that kind of made it not be as great as the other two for me, because we have so much set up and then like so much happens in this book, and I just think we needed more time to sit with a lot of things. Like there were a lot of big things that actually happened off page in this book, which I didn't find very satisfying. But then there were other parts of the series that I did find really satisfying, and other parts of this book that I found really satisfying. So this is definitely like, hey, this is what war looks like. This is what like war and politics look like. This is war between a bunch of very ancient gods and people trying to like choose their own fate and their own destiny, but also being like very manipulated and controlled by a lot of gods and things. So yeah, it's all of that. We have very complicated relationships and relationship dynamics. This is definitely a series that has a lot of queer characters, but like the queer characters, I wouldn't call it bury your gaze by any means, but it's like, this is not a romance series. This is fraught. There's a lot of fraughtness happening with all of the relationship stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of talk, especially in this last book, about yeah, like fate and prophecy and trying to undo fate and undo prophecy. So I really enjoyed that and like the character arts and things. But definitely triggers for like war and xenophobia and racism and like torture and like some body horror things and all of that. So very heavy. Overall, I really enjoyed this series. I think the series overall is about a 4 to 4.5 star series, maybe even 5-star series. Honestly, well, probably like 4.5. Doesn't quite make the 5-star for me. This installment I gave 4 stars, but I wouldn't say was a bad conclusion. I just, again, think that there were some things that could have switched up and we could have had more books, and that would have been great. But I am very excited for the future of Rebecca Roanhorse books. I will continue to read her books. I think she's fantastic. Black Sun, still my favorite of the whole series, but overall super solid. And I really hope she returns to the 6th World series, even though she said she's not going to. But I would love her to, because I miss that series deeply, and it's an urban fantasy series based on like DNA folklore and mythology, and I want it back. So maybe she'll return to that. But yeah, solid conclusion to this little section of books. So comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I will talk to you guys later with my second round of books very, very soon. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.